Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 61. One of Her Majesty's wet nurses who held the 5th rank left today for the province of Hyuga. Among the fans given her by the Empress as a parting gift was one with a painting of a traveler's lodging, not unlike the captain of Ide's residence. On the other side was a picture of the capital in a heavy rainstorm with someone gazing at the scene. In her own hand, the Empress had written the following sentence as if it were an ordinary piece of prose. When you have gone away and faced the sun that shines so crimson in the east, be mindful of the friends you left behind, who in this city gaze upon the endless rains. It was a very moving message, and I realized that I myself could not possibly leave such a mistress and go away to some distant place. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 62. One has sent someone a poem, or a reply to a poem, and after the messenger has left, thinks of a couple of words that ought to be changed. One has sewn something in a hurry. The task seems finished, but on pulling out the needle one discovers that one forgot to knot the end of the thread. It is also very annoying to find that one has sewn something back to front. One day when the Empress was staying in the southern palace, she went to visit His Excellency, her father, in the western wing. I and the other ladies, waiting, were gathered in the main building with nothing particular to do. We wandered along the corridors, trying to distract ourselves in one way or another. Then a messenger came from Her Majesty. A robe is wanted in a hurry, we were told. All of you are to get together and make sure that it is delivered to the Empress, fully sewn, before the next watch. We were then given some plain silk material. My companions and I assembled at the front of the main hall, each of us taking a piece of silk and each determined to be the first to finish her work. We sat side by side, not facing each other, and started sewing at great speed. Nurse Mayabu, who did the wide sleeves, finished her work before anyone else. In her haste, however, she did not notice that she had sewn one piece of material inside out. Without even tying the final knot, she laid down the sleeves and stood up. When it came to putting the different parts of the dress together at the back, we soon realized that there had been a mistake. The ladies laughed and scolded the nurse, saying, "You'd better do it over again properly." "And who do you suppose would admit she had made a mistake in sewing?" said the nurse. "With patterned silk, of course. One would have to start again if one had mistaken the front for the back. But with plain material like this, what does it matter? If anyone has to do her work again, I don't see why it should be me. Ask the girls who still haven't finished their sewing." Since she could not be persuaded, the rest of us had to start our work over again. It was really amusing to watch the expressions of Sei Shōnagon, Shonagon, and the others as they sat there plying their needles and muttering, "How does she think she can get away with it?" All this because Her Majesty intended to visit the Emperor that evening and had said, "I shall know that the one who gets her work done first really loves me." It is annoying when a messenger delivers a letter to a person not meant to see it. If he simply admitted his mistake, it would not be so bad. But when he begins insisting that he merely carried out orders, it is really infuriating. If I were not afraid that someone might see me, I should rush up and strike him. One has planted some nice clover or Suzuki grass and goes to have a look at it. What a painful and annoying experience to find someone with a long box and a spade who has carefully dug up the plants and is now carrying them away. If a gentleman were present, the fellow would not dare act like this. On being reproached, he answers, "I've only taken a little," and hurries off. A retainer of some grand family comes to the house of a provincial official and speaks to him rudely with an expression implying, "You may find my manner annoying, but what can you do about it?" A man snatches a letter that one does not want him to see and takes it into the garden, where he stands reading it. One runs after him in a rage. But one cannot go beyond the curtains, and there one stops, wishing that one could leap out at the man, a woman is angry with her lover about some trifle and refuses to continue lying next to him. After fidgeting about in bed, she decides to get up. The man gently tries to draw her back, but she is still cross. "Very well then," he says, feeling that she has gone too far. "As you please." Full of resentment, he buries himself under his bedclothes and settles down for the night. It is a cold night, and since the woman is wearing only an unlined robe, she soon begins to feel uncomfortable. Everyone else in the house is asleep, and besides, it would be most unseemly for her to get up alone and walk about. As the night wears on, she lies there on her side of the bed feeling very annoyed that the quarrel did not take place earlier in the evening, when it would have been easy to leave. Then she begins to hear strange sounds in the back of the house and outside. Frightened, she gently moves over in bed towards her lover, tugging at the bedclothes, whereupon he annoys her further by pretending to be asleep. "Why not be standoffish a little longer?" he asks her finally. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 63. While entertaining a visitor, one hears some servants chatting without any restraint in one of the back rooms. It is embarrassing to know that one's visitor can overhear. But how to stop them? A man whom one loves gets drunk and keeps repeating himself. To have spoken about someone, not knowing that he could overhear. This is embarrassing even if it be a servant or some other completely insignificant person. To hear one's servants making merry. This is equally annoying if one is on a journey and staying in cramped quarters or at home and hears the servants in a neighboring room. Parents, convinced that their ugly child is adorable, pet him and repeat the things he has said, imitating his voice. An ignoramus, who in the presence of some learned person puts on a knowing air and converses about men of old. A man recites his own poems, not especially good ones, and tells one about the praise they have received, most embarrassing. Lying awake at night, one says something to one's companion, who simply goes on sleeping. In the presence of a skilled musician, someone plays a zither just for his own pleasure and without tuning it. A son-in-law who has long since stopped visiting his wife runs into his father-in-law in a public place. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 64. While one is cleaning a decorative comb, something catches in the teeth and the comb breaks. A carriage overturns. One would have imagined that such a solid, bulky object would remain forever on its wheels. It all seems like a dream, astonishing and senseless. A child or grown-up blurts out something that is bound to make people uncomfortable. All night long one has been waiting for a man who one thought was sure to arrive. At dawn, just when one has forgotten about him for a moment and dozed off, a crow caws loudly. One wakes up with a start and sees that it is daytime, most astonishing. One of the bowmen in an archery contest stands trembling for a long time before shooting. When finally he does release his arrow, it goes in the wrong direction. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 65. It was during the abstinence of the 5th month when Her Majesty was reciting in the Empress's office. The 2-span apartment in front of the store room had been especially decorated for the occasion, and I enjoyed seeing how different it looked. From the beginning of the month, it had been dark and rainy. "This is becoming a bore," I said one day. "I should like to go somewhere to hear a Hotadajisu singing." The other women enjoyed the idea and said that they wanted to accompany me. One of them suggested a bridge behind Kamo Shrine. It had an unpleasant name, something like Weaver Bridge. "The Hotadajisu sings there every day," she said. "Those aren't Hotadajisu," said someone else. They're cicadas. Nevertheless, we planned to go there, and on the morning of the 5th day, we ordered the men from the office of the Empress's household to get our carriage ready. Since it was the rainy season, we decided that no one would object if we left by the gate next to the guard house at the north of the palace. The carriage was pulled up to our veranda, and 4 of us climbed inside. "Can't we get another carriage of our own and go along with them?" asked some of the other women, but the Empress refused. Though they were very disappointed, we set off without listening to their complaints or showing any sympathy. As we passed the riding ground, we noticed a throng of noisy people and asked what was happening. It turned out that they were doing archery practice with the great bow. We were invited to stay and watch for a while. "All the middle and minor captains of the Left Guards Division are here," we were told. But we saw no one of the kind. There were only a few officials of the 6th rank wandering about the place. "Not very interesting, is it?" said one of the women. "Let's go on at once." So we continued on our way to Kamo, the road reminding us pleasantly of the festival. Since Lord Akinabu's house lay on our way, someone suggested that we should stop and have a look at it. We told our men to draw the carriage up to the veranda, and we all got out. It was a plain, rustic place. The sliding paper, door with pictures of horses, the wickerwork screens, the water burr blinds, everything seemed deliberately arranged to look old-fashioned. The house itself was designed in the simplest style, but poor and cramped as everything was, it still had a certain charm. As for the Hotadajisu, they were singing to each other so loudly that we were almost deafened. It really was a shame that Her Majesty was not there to hear them, and we also felt sorry for the women who had wanted so badly to come with us. "When one visits a new place," said our host, "it's always interesting to see the local activities." He sent for a large quantity of what I took to be rice plants, and also summoned a number of quite pleasant-looking young girls from his own household and some common women from the neighboring farms. Half a dozen threshed the rice, while a couple of others used a revolving machine of a type that I had never seen before. As they worked, they sang such a strange song that we all burst out laughing and completely forgot about writing our Hotadajisu poems. Next, Lord Akinabu ordered his servants to bring out some small tables of the kind one sees in Chinese pictures, and we were served a meal. Noticing that none of us paid much attention to the food, he said, "I am afraid this is only rough country fare. But if you come to this sort of place and don't like the food, you must tell your host quite frankly, and he will serve you something more to your taste. You ladies really are the shyest guests I've ever had." He encouraged us to help ourselves. "Do have some of these fern sprouts," he said. I picked them with my own hands. "But really," I said, "how can you expect us to sit here eating in a row like a lot of common maid servants?" "Of course," said Akinabu, and ordered his attendants to remove the dishes. "I should have realized that, ladies in waiting like you are accustomed to the formality of life in the palace." While the servants were bustling about, taking the dishes off the tables and putting everything in order, one of our men came and announced that it was going to rain. So we hurried back to our carriage. "I should have liked to write my Hotadajisu poem before we left," I remarked. "Never mind," said the others. "You can do it just as well on our way back." Before starting, we picked some long branches of Hana, covered with white blossoms, and decorated our carriage with them, so that they hung out of the blinds and sides. It really looked as though a great white cloak had been spread across the roof. Our attendants were delighted and, laughing loudly, began to stick branches into every possible place, even through the bamboo framework of the carriage. "There's still room for some here," they shouted, adding bough after bough. "And here, another place." I was hoping that we would be seen by someone on our way back. Alas, all we met was an occasional indigent priest and a few other people too common to be worth mentioning. As we approached the palace, we decided that we really could not let the outing come to an end without making sure that someone would see us and spread the news about our carriage. So we stopped next to the palace of the First Ward and sent a servant to ask for His Excellency, Fujiwara no Kimanabu, the gentleman, in waiting, informing him that we were on our way back from hearing the Hatatajisu. "I shall be with you at once, my dear ladies," came the reply. The messenger added that His Excellency had gone to the attendance hall and was hurriedly changing into court trousers. We replied that we could not possibly wait and told our driver to set off at full speed for Tsuchi Gate. Presently Kimanabu appeared, running after our carriage, and accompanied by a number of attendants and lackeys who had not even had time to put on their shoes. He had managed to get dressed with amazing speed, but was still tying his sash as he dashed along the road. "Wait a minute," he shouted. "Wait a minute." We told our driver to go still faster and had already reached Tsuchi Gate when Kimanabu caught up with us, gasping for breath and extremely flustered. It was only then that he saw how our carriage was decorated. "I cannot believe there are real people in there," he said with a laugh. "Do get out and let me see you." The men with him were greatly amused. "And what about your poems?" he added. "You must let me hear them." "No," I replied. "We have to show them to Her Majesty first." At that moment it started to rain in earnest. "I wonder why just this gate had to be built without a roof," said Kimanabu. "What a dreadful nuisance on a day like this. How am I ever going to get home?" When I started running after your carriage, the only thought in my mind was not to miss you. It did not occur to me that I might be seen. Oh dear, I really must be getting back. How depressing. Come, I said. Why don't you go into the palace with us? In my lacquered cap, he said. How can I do that? Send for something more formal. But now it was really raining heavily, and our men, who had no head covering, pulled in the carriage as quickly as they could. An attendant brought Kimanabu an umbrella from his palace, and someone held it over him while he started to make his way home. He walked slowly this time, and there was a melancholy expression on his face as he looked back at us over his shoulder. I was pleased to see that in his hand, he carried nothing but a spray of Hana. When we came into the Empress's presence, she asked us how things had turned out. The ladies who had been left behind were at first resentful and sullen. But when we described how Kimanabu had run after us along the First Avenue, they all joined in laughing. Well now, said Her Majesty, where are they, your poems? We explained that we had not written any. Really, she said. That is most unfortunate. The gentlemen at court are sure to hear of your expedition. How are you going to explain that you haven't got a single interesting poem to show for it? You should have dashed off something on the spur of the moment while you were listening to the Hatata Jisoo. Because you wanted to make too much of it all, you let your inspiration vanish. I'm surprised at you. But you can still make up for it. Write something now. Surely that is not asking too much. Everything that Her Majesty said was true, and we were really distressed by our failure. I was discussing possible poems with the other women when a message arrived from Kimanabu. His poem was attached to some of the white blossom, and the paper itself was as white as the flower. If only I had known that you were off to hear the cuckoo's song, I should have sent my heart to join you on your way. Since the messenger was awaiting a reply, I asked someone to fetch an ink stone from our apartments, but the Empress ordered me to use hers. Quickly, she said. Write something on this. A piece of paper had been placed in the lid. Why don't you write the reply? I said to Lady Sei Shōnagon. No, I'd rather you did it, she answered. Meanwhile, it had been getting dark, and now the rain started coming down again, accompanied by great claps of thunder, which so terrified us that we could think of nothing except closing the lattices. In our confusion, we quite forgot about the messenger. The thunder continued rumbling until nightfall. When it eventually stopped, we set about writing our poem in earnest. But just at that moment, a group of high court nobles and senior courtiers arrived to ask how the Empress had fared in the thunderstorm, and we had to go to the west entrance and talk with them. Then at last, we could concentrate on our poem. But now the other women withdrew, saying that only the person to whom the poem was addressed should be responsible. It was really a nuisance. Poetry seemed to be having a bad karma that day. "We shall simply have to keep as quiet as we can about our outing," I said with a laugh. "I still see no reason," said Her Majesty, "why some of you who went to hear the Hotadajisu can't write a proper poem about it. I suppose it's because you have set your minds against it." She looked rather cross, yet even this I found charming. "Yes, Your Majesty," I said, "but by now the whole thing's become a bit pointless." "Is it all that pointless?" she said. The matter of the poem was allowed to drop. A couple of days later, when we were discussing our excursion, Lady Sei mentioned the fern sprouts that Akinabu said he had picked with his own hands. Her Majesty overheard us. "So that is the sort of thing you remember," she said, laughing. She picked up a stray piece of paper and wrote. A longing for those fern sprouts lingers in her head. "Now then," she said to me, "you must provide the opening lines." I was delighted and wrote, "More than the cuckoo's song she went to hear." "Well, Shonagon," said the Empress merrily, "I wonder how you dare mention that bird at all." "How so, Your Majesty?" I replied, rather embarrassed. "In any case," I continued, "I have decided to give up writing poetry for good and all. If each time there is a poem to be composed you call on me to do it, I don't see how I can remain in Your Majesty's service. After all, I don't even know how to count the syllables correctly. How can I be expected to write winter poems in the spring and spring poems in the autumn and poems about chrysanthemums when the plum blossoms are in bloom? I realize that there have been many poets in my family, and of course it's a great satisfaction if one of my verses turns out well and people say, 'Of everything written on that day, Shonagon's was the best.' But that's what one would expect considering who her father was. The trouble is that I have no particular talent, and if I push myself forward and turn out some doggerel as though I thought it were a masterpiece, I feel I am disgracing the memory of my ancestors." I was speaking quite seriously, but the Empress laughed and said, "In that case you must do exactly as you wish. I shan't ask you to write any more poems." Late one evening, not long after this incident, His Excellency the Minister of the Center, Korchika, who was making elaborate preparations for the Night of the Monkey, gave out subjects on which the Empress's ladies, in waiting, were to write poems. They were all very excited and eagerly set themselves to the task. Meanwhile, I stayed with the Empress and talked to her about various things. Presently, Korchika caught sight of me. "Why don't you join the others and write a poem?" he asked. "Pick your subject. Her Majesty has excused me from poetry," I said, "and I don't have to worry about such things anymore." "How odd," said Korchika. I can hardly believe she would allow that. "Very well, you may do as you like at other times, but please write something tonight." But I did not pay the slightest attention. When the poems of the other women were being judged, the Empress handed me the following little note. "Surely it is not you, you whom we know as Madasuk's heir, that will be missing from this evening's round of verse." I laughed delightedly, and when Korchika asked me what had happened, I replied with this verse. Were I not known to be the daughter of that man, I should have been the very first to pen a poem for this night of verse. And I added to Her Majesty that, if my father were anyone else, I should have written 1,000 poems for her without even waiting to be asked. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 66. It was a clear, moonlit night a little after the 10th of the 8th month. Her Majesty, who was residing in the Empress's office, sat by the edge of the veranda while Yukin no Neishi played the flute for her. The other ladies in attendance sat together, talking and laughing, but I stayed by myself, leaning against one of the pillars between the main hall and the veranda. "Why so silent?" said Her Majesty. "Say something." "It is sad when you do not speak." "I am gazing into the autumn moon," I replied. "Ah yes," she remarked. "That is just what you should have said." Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 67. Empress's presence one day, when there were several people in the Empress's presence, including many senior courtiers and young noblemen, I was leaning against a pillar, chatting with some of the other women. Suddenly, Her Majesty threw a note at me. "Should I love you or should I not?" it said. "What will you do if I cannot give you first place in my heart?" No doubt she was thinking of a recent conversation when I had remarked in her hearing, "If I do not come first in people's affections, I had just as soon not be loved at all. In fact, I would rather be hated or even maltreated. It is better to be dead than to be loved in the second or third place." "Yes, I must be first." Hearing this, someone had said, "There we have the single vehicle of the law," and everyone had burst out laughing. Now the Empress gave me a brush and some paper. I wrote the following note and handed it to her. "Among the 9 ranks of lotus seats, even the lowliest would satisfy me." Well, well," said the Empress, "you seem to have lost heart completely." "That's bad. I prefer you to go on thinking as you did before." "My attitude depends on the person in question," I replied. "That's really bad," she said, much to my delight. "You should try to come first in the affections of even the most important people." Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 68. His Excellency, the Middle Counselor, Takya, visited the Empress one day and presented her with a fan. "I have found a most magnificent fan frame," he told her. "I want to have it covered, but it can't be done with ordinary paper. I am looking for something very special." "What sort of a frame is it?" asked Her Majesty. "It's absolutely splendid," declared Takya. "People say they've never seen anything like it before, and they're quite right." "Well then," I said, "it's not a fan frame at all. It must be the frame of a jellyfish." "Very amusing," said Takya. "Let's take it that I meant to say that myself. This incident deserves to be included in my section on embarrassing things, and perhaps I should not have recorded it at all. But I have been told to leave nothing out, and so I really had no choice." Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 69. Once during a long spell of rainy, whether the secretary of the Ministry of Ceremonial, Nobitsyun, arrived at the Empress's palace with a message from His Majesty. A cushion was brought out for him, but he pushed it away even farther than he normally did on these occasions and sat down on the floor. "Whom do you think that cushion is for?" I asked him. "If I sat on the cushion after being out in this rain," he replied with a laugh, "it would get all nasty and stained with my footmarks." "How so?" I said. "Are you under the impression that the cushion is to couch your feet on?" "There's nothing very clever about that remark," said Nobitsyun. "If I hadn't mentioned my footmarks, you'd never have thought of your little joke." He then kept on pointing out that it was he, not I, who was responsible for the joke. At first I found this rather amusing, but after a while I could no longer bear to hear him praising himself so lavishly, and, turning to the Empress, I told the following story. Many years ago there lived in the palace of the great Empress an attendant called Inutagi, Dog's Vomit, who, despite her low rank, had made quite a reputation for herself. Fujiwara no Takacarrot, who died while serving as governor of Mino, was at that time a chamberlain. One day he called at the room where many of the lower attendants were gathered and said, "So this is the famous Inutagi. Why don't you look like your name?" "I do," she replied, "but it depends on the weather." Everyone, including the high court nobles and senior courtiers, found Inutagi amusing, because even when a trap was set for her in advance, she always managed to acquit herself cleverly. And the stories about her must be true. They've been handed down for a long time without any change. Yes, said Nobitsune, but it was Takakura who put the idea into her head. As for myself, he continued, I can compose a good poem in either Chinese or Japanese on any subject you give me. Really, I replied. Very well, I'll give you a subject and you will kindly write me a poem in Japanese. Splendid, said Nobitsune. But why only one subject? I can just as well handle a whole lot. Hearing his boast, the Empress herself proposed a subject, at which Nobitsune promptly took his leave, saying, Dear me, how frightening. I'd better be off. He has an appalling hand, someone explained after he had left the room. Whether in Chinese characters or Japanese script, the results are equally poor. People are always laughing at him about it. That's why he had to escape. One day, when Nobitsune was serving as intendant in the office of palace works, he sent a sketch to one of the craftsmen explaining how a certain piece of work should be done. Kindly executed in this fashion, he added in Chinese characters. I happened to notice the piece of paper, and it was the most preposterous writing I had ever seen. Next to his message I wrote, If you do the work in this style, it will certainly turn out strangely. The document found its way to the imperial apartments, and everyone who saw it was greatly amused, except, of course, Nobitsune, who was furious, and after this held a grudge against me. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 70. When the lady of the Shijaisha entered the crown prince's palace on the 10th of the first month, the ceremonies were carried out with great splendor. She wrote frequently to her sister, the Empress, but they did not actually meet. Then, on the 10th of the following month, the Shijaisha sent Her Majesty a message that she would come to see her. In honor of this visit, the Empress's apartments were decorated even more beautifully than usual, and everything was especially cleaned and polished. We ladies, in waiting, also prepared ourselves carefully. The Shijaisha arrived very late at night and was taken to the two-span apartment that had been prepared for her in the eastern wing of the Toka Palace. As soon as it was dawn, the lattices were raised, and presently her father, the Chancellor, arrived in a carriage with his wife. In the morning, I attended the Empress while her hair was being dressed. A 4-foot curtain of state had been placed across the main hall, facing the back of the room. Her Majesty was seated in the front part of the room, while a group of ladies, in waiting, was gathered behind the curtain of state. Hardly any furniture had been put out, only a straw mat with a cushion for Her Majesty and a round brazier. While her hair was being done, the Empress asked me whether I knew the Shijaisha. How could I possibly know her, Your Majesty? I replied. The only time I came near her was during the memorial service at Shakyuzen Temple, and then I just glimpsed her from the back. Very well then, said the Empress. Sit behind me, and if you look through the space between the curtain and that pillar, you'll be able to see her. Isn't she beautiful? I was overjoyed to see the Shijaisha and longed for the time when I would get a really good view of her. Now the Empress's hair had been dressed, and she was ready to be robed. Over a 3-layered scarlet dress of beaten silk, she wore 2 plum, red robes, one of heavily embroidered material and the other more lightly worked. Tell me, she said, do you think the plum red really goes with dark scarlet? I know this isn't the season for plum red, but I can't stand colors like light green. Unusual though the combination was, Her Majesty looked beautiful. The color of her clothes went perfectly with her complexion, and as I gazed at her, I was impatient to have a proper look at the Shijaisha to see whether she was equally pretty. Presently, Her Majesty crept out from where she had been sitting. Some of the women noticed how I had installed myself by the curtains and was peering at the people in the other part of the room. "What a way to behave," they said, much to my amusement. Very suspicious. Since the hall was wide open, with no other curtains or screens, I had an extremely good view. Her Highness, the Chancellor's wife, wore a white robe over 2 dresses of scarlet silk and a formal skirt with a long train. Lifting the folds of her skirt, she moved towards the back of the room. Since she was turned sideways, I could not see her properly. The Shā, who had moved back a little, was now facing in my direction. She had on several plum, red under robes of different shades, an unlined costume of deep red damask, a long, flowing robe of darkish red, and an robe of richly embroidered light green silk which made her look very young. She held her fan steadily in front of her face. Altogether, she was magnificent. His Excellency, the Chancellor, wore a light violet court cloak, lace trousers of light green material, and a scarlet underrobe. He faced towards us, leaning against one of the pillars between the main part of the hall and the veranda, and fastening the cord round the neckband of his cloak in a loose knot. At the sight of his beautiful daughters, he smiled with delight and chatted away in his usual bantering fashion. I glanced again at the Shā, who was looking extraordinarily pretty. But when I turned back to Her Majesty and saw her tranquil expression, her charming features which had recently taken on a more adult cast, and her complexion which went so beautifully with her scarlet clothes, I realized that no one in the world could equal her. Now the attendants brought water for the Shā's ablutions. As I recall, there were altogether 6 attendants, 2 young maids and 4 servants of lower rank, and they came along the galleries through Senio and Jogan palaces. I noticed that only half a dozen ladies waiting were seated under the Chinese roof at our end of the gallery. There was not enough room for all the Shā's ladies, and the others had gone back after escorting their mistress to Toka Palace. The young attendants were very pretty in their loose, cherry-colored coats, under skirts of light green and plum red, and long trains. I enjoyed watching them take the basin of water from the servants and place it next to the Shā. Also in attendance were Lady Shōsho, the daughter of Sukamasa, director of the Bureau of Imperial Stables, and Lady Seisho, the daughter of the gentleman of Kitano of the 3rd rank. They were seated next to the Empress, and the embroidered silk of their Chinese jackets emerged charmingly from beneath the curtain of state. The palace girls who were helping the Shā with her ablutions wore divided skirts of green and shaded material, Chinese jackets, waistband ribbons, and shoulder sashes. Their faces were heavily powdered. The servants passed them what was needed for the ablutions, and I was pleased to see how everything was done with proper ceremony in the Chinese style. When the time came for the Empress's morning meal, the palace hairdresser arrived to do the hair of the lady chamberlains and of the attendants who were to serve Her Majesty. The screen behind which I had been peeping was now pushed aside, and I felt exactly like a demon who has been robbed of his straw coat. I had not seen nearly enough, and rather annoyed by the interruption, I moved next to one of the pillars where I could go on watching the scene from between a bamboo blind and a curtain of state. However, my train and the skirts of my robe stuck out under the blind. His Excellency, the Chancellor, happened to notice this and said in a reproachful tone, "Who can it be, she whom I dimly glimpse through a clearing in the mist?" "It must be Shonagon," replied the Empress. "She is very curious to see what is going on." "Oh, how embarrassing," said the Chancellor with a smug look. "I've known her for a long time, and I hate her to see what ugly daughters I have." Then the attendants brought in the Shā's meal. "Really," said the Chancellor, "I'm becoming jealous. Now their ladyships have been served. I do hope they'll finish their meals quickly so that I and my old woman can start on the scraps." He continued joking like this all day long. Presently, the Major Counselor and the middle captain of the 3rd rank arrived with Matsujimi. The Chancellor, who had been waiting for them impatiently, picked up the little boy and put him on his knees in a most charming way. The veranda was too narrow for the men's formal court costumes, and thereunder, robes trailed all over the floor. The major counselor looked extremely handsome, and the middle captain was impressive for his age. As I observed the two young men, it occurred to me that, while the chancellor could be expected to have such splendid sons, their mother's good fortune must be the result of some special karma. The chancellor told them to sit down on the straw cushions that were spread on the veranda, but they hastily took their leave, explaining that they had to report for duty. Shortly afterwards, a secretary, I do not know his name, came from the Ministry of Ceremonial with a message from the emperor for his wife. The attendants placed a cushion for him in the room at the north of the buttery, and he sat down, while the empress hastened to write her reply. Before there was even time to remove the cushion, Chikyori, the minor captain of the inner palace guards, arrived bearing a letter from the crown prince to the Sei Shōnagon. Since there was no room for Chikyori on the veranda of the gallery, his cushion was placed at the east of the main veranda. He handed over the letter, which, after the Sei Shōnagon had examined it, was read in turn by the chancellor and his wife, and also by the empress. "You had better make haste with your reply," the chancellor told the Sei Shōnagon, but she did not seem to be in any hurry. "Why aren't you writing?" said the chancellor. "I suppose it's because I am watching you. Otherwise, you'd have answered at once without any prompting from me." I was delighted to see the girl blushing slightly as she smiled at her father's words. Now her mother also told her to hurry up and produce an answer. She accordingly sat down, facing the back of the room, and started to write with the help of her mother, who came and sat next to her. I noticed that the Sei Shōnagon was looking more and more embarrassed. As a gift for the messenger, the empress produced a formal, wide-sleeved robe of light green material together with a trouser, skirt. These were pushed out from beneath her blind, and the middle captain of the third rank gave them to the man. It was clear from his attitude, as he took the clothes, and left that he was not too pleased with his reward. Meanwhile, Matsujimi babbled away. Everyone was delighted and made a great fuss over him. "I don't suppose there would be any harm in passing him off as the empress's child," said the chancellor. Of course he was joking, but his words made me worry about why Her Majesty had not yet done what His Excellency had in mind. At about the hour of the sheep, the emperor appeared with a great rustling of silk robes. So sudden was his arrival that there was not even time to announce that the mats leading to the entrance had been laid out for him. The empress joined her husband, and they both promptly retired to the curtained dais, while the ladies, in waiting, went and sat in the front of the anteroom. I noticed that the gallery was full of senior courtiers. The chancellor summoned servants from the office of the empress's household and made them bring fruit and other dishes to be eaten with wine. "Now let everyone get drunk," he said. And everyone did get drunk. The gentlemen began to exchange remarks with the ladies, in waiting, and they all found each other extremely amusing. At sunset, His Majesty got up and called for the major counselor, Yamanoi. Then, having ordered his gentlemen to help him on with his court robes, he left for his palace. He was resplendent in his cherry blossom court cloak and his crimson robe, which reflected the light of the evening glow. But His Majesty is such an awe-inspiring figure that I cannot continue writing about him like this. Yamanoi was not on very close terms with his brothers. He looked magnificent, handsomer even than Korchika, but unfortunately people were always running him down. As he set out for his palace, the emperor was escorted by His Excellency the Chancellor, the Major Counselor Yamanoi, the middle captain of the third rank, and the director of the imperial storehouse. Later, Lady Uma no Naishi arrived with a message from His Majesty, asking the empress to come to him. She did not want to go, however, and replied that it was impossible for her that evening. "That will never do," said the chancellor when he heard this. "You must go to him at once. There was also a constant stream of messengers from the crown prince. Ladies in waiting who had come from the emperor's palace and from the crown prince's residence were bustling about, urging Her Majesty and the Sei Shōnagon to make haste and join their husbands. "Very well," said the empress, "but first you must escort my sister." "How can I possibly go ahead of you?" asked the Sei Shōnagon. "Whatever you may say," insisted the empress, "it is I who will see you off." I found their conversation both amusing and delightful. Eventually, the two sisters agreed that the one who had farther to go should leave first, and so the Sei Shōnagon went before the empress. After she had gone, the chancellor and the other gentlemen departed. Then finally Her Majesty set off for the emperor's palace. The people who accompanied the chancellor were laughing so heartily at his jokes that they almost fell off the bridge. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 71. On the last day of the second month, when there was a strong wind, a dark gray sky, and a little snow, a man from the office of grounds came to the black door and asked to speak to me. He then approached and gave me a note which he said was from Kinto, the imperial advisor. It consisted of a sheet of pocket paper on which was written, and for a moment in my heart, I feel that spring has come. The words were most appropriate for the weather, but what concerned me was that I was bound to produce the opening lines. I asked the messenger which gentlemen were present, and he gave me their names. They were all the type of men to put me on my mettle, but it was Kinto's presence among them that made me most reluctant to give a commonplace answer. I felt very alone and wished that I could show the note to Her Majesty and discuss my predicament, but I knew that she was lying down with the emperor. The man from the office of grounds urged me to hurry, and I realized that if, in addition to bungling my reply, I was slow about it, I should really disgrace myself. "It can't be helped," I thought, and, trembling with emotion, wrote the following lines. As though pretending to be blooms, the snow flakes scatter in the wintry sky. I handed my poem to the messenger and anxiously wondered how Kinto and the others would receive it. If their verdict was unfavorable, I would rather not hear it, I thought as I eagerly awaited the news. It turned out that the captain of the Middle Palace Guards, who at that time held the rank of middle captain in the Inner Palace Guards, was present when my answer arrived, and he told me that Tashikata, the imperial advisor, gave the following judgment. After this, she deserves to be appointed to the palace attendant's office. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 72. Masahiro really is a laughing stock. I wonder what it is like for his parents and friends. If people see him with a decent-looking servant, they always call for the fellow and laughingly ask how he can wait upon such a master and what he thinks of him. There are skilled dyers and weavers in Masahiro's household, and when it comes to dress, whether it be the color of his robe or the style of his cloak, he is more elegant than most men. Yet the only effect of his elegance is to make people say, "What a shame someone else is wearing these things," and how strangely he expresses himself. Once, when he was due to report for night duty at the palace, he ordered that the clothes and other things he would need should be brought from his house. "Send 2 servants," he said. One man came and said that he could easily carry everything. "You're an odd fellow," said Masahiro. "How can one man bring the things of 2 people? After all, can you put 2 measures in a 1-measure jar?" No one had the slightest idea what he meant, but there was loud laughter. On another occasion, a messenger brought Masahiro a letter from someone, asking for an immediate reply. "You hateful fellow," said Masahiro. "Has someone been putting peas on the stove? And who's stolen the ink and brush I had in this residence? Very odd." I could understand people taking rice or wine, and again, everyone laughed. When the Empress Dowager was ill, Masahiro was sent from the palace to inquire after her. When he came back, people asked which of her gentlemen in waiting had been present. He named a few people, 4 or 5 in all. Was no one else there? Well, there were some others, replied Masahiro, but they had all left. It is amazing that we could still laugh at him, so accustomed were we to hearing his foolishness. One day when I was alone, he came up to me and said, "My dear lady, I have something I must tell you at once, something that I've just heard." "And what may that be?" I asked. He approached my curtain. I heard someone who, instead of saying, "Bring your body closer," used the phrase, "Bring up your 5 parts." And again I burst into laughter. On the middle night during the period of official appointments, Masahiro was responsible for filling the lamps with oil. He rested his foot on the cloth under the pedestal of one of the lamps, and since the cloth happened to have been freshly oiled, his foot stuck to it. As soon as he started to walk off, the lamp fell over, and as he hurried along with the cloth stuck to his foot, the lamp dragged after him, making a terrible clatter. One day when he thought he was alone in the table room, neither of the first secretaries having reported for duty, Masahiro took a dish of beans that was lying there and went behind the little screen. Suddenly, someone pulled aside the screen, and there was Masahiro, stealthily munching away at the beans. Everyone who saw him was convulsed with laughter. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 73. On the last day of the 4th month, we made a pilgrimage to Heian Temple by way of Yodo Ferry. Our carriage was put on the ferry, and as we crossed the river, I observed the iris, water oats, and other plants that grew out of the water. They looked quite short, but when we told our attendants to pluck some of them, I discovered that they had extremely long stems. I enjoyed watching the passing boats laden with water, oats, and it occurred to me that this was the sort of scene described in the Song of Take's Pool. When we returned on the 3rd of the following month, it was raining heavily. We saw men and children setting out to pick irises. They wore tiny sedge hats, and their clothes were tucked up high on their legs. It was just like a screen painting. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 74. Pinks, cherry blossoms, yellow roses. Men or women who are praised in romances as being beautiful. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 75. Pines. Autumn fields. Mountain villages and paths. Cranes and deer. A very cold winter scene, an unspeakably hot summer scene. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 76. During the long rains in the 5th month, there is something very moving about a place with a pond. Between the dense irises, water, oats, and other plants, one can see the green of the water, and the entire garden seems to be the same green color. One stays there all day long, gazing in contemplation at the clouded sky. Oh, how moving it is. I am always moved and delighted by places that have ponds, not only in the winter, when I love waking up to find that the water has frozen over, but at every time of the year. The ponds I like best are not those in which everything is carefully laid out. I much prefer one that has been left to itself, so that it is wild and covered with weeds. At night, in the green spaces of water, one can see nothing but the pale glow of the moonlight. At any time and in any place, I find moonlight very moving. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 77. In the 1st month, when I go to a temple for a retreat, I like the weather to be extremely cold. There should be snow on the ground, and everything should be frozen. If it looks like rain, however, I feel most dissatisfied. Once I went on a pilgrimage to Heian Temple. While our rooms were being prepared, our carriage was pulled up to the foot of the log steps that lead to the temple. Young priests, wearing only their sashes and robes, and with those things called high clogs on their feet, were hurrying up and down the steps without the slightest precaution, reciting verses from the sacred storehouse or such scraps from the sutras as came into their heads. It was very appropriate to the place, and I found it charming. Later, when we started to climb the steps, we were terrified and kept close to the side, clinging to the banisters. I was amused to see that the priests walked as freely as on an ordinary wooden floor. Presently, a priest told us that our rooms were ready and asked us to go to them directly. He brought us some overshoes and helped us out of our carriage. Among the pilgrims who had already arrived, I saw some who were wearing their clothes inside out, while others were dressed in formal style, with trains on their skirts and Chinese jackets. The sight of so many people shuffling along the corridors in lacquered leather shoes and short clogs was delightful and reminded me of the palace. Several acolytes and some young men who had the run of the temple grounds and buildings followed us, saying, "There's a drop now. Here the corridor goes up," and so on. Close behind us came another group. I have no idea who they were, and they tried to push their way ahead of us. "Wait a moment," our guide said. "These are ladies of quality. You people must keep your distance." Some bowed and fell back, but others paid no attention at all and hurried ahead, each determined to be the first before the Buddha. On the way to our rooms, we had to pass in front of rows of strangers. I found this very unpleasant, but when I reached the chapel and got a view past the dog, barrier, and right up to the sanctuary, I was overcome with awe and wondered how I could have stayed away for so many months. My old feelings were aroused, and they overwhelmed all else. The lamps that lit the sacred image in the sanctuary were not permanent ones, but had been brought by pilgrims as offerings. They burnt with terrifying brightness, and in their light the Buddha glittered brilliantly. Priest after priest reverently entered the sanctuary, and, kneeling on the platform of worship, held up his petition in both hands and read it aloud. So many people were bustling about that it was hard to make out what any particular priest was saying, but occasionally I could distinguish a strained voice pronouncing some phrase like 1,000 platforms on behalf of Lord So, and so. I was kneeling down to pray, with the sash of my skirt hanging loosely over my shoulders, when a priest came up to me and said, "I have brought you this." He was carrying a bough of anise, and I was delighted by the gesture. Presently, another priest came from the dog, barrier. He told us that he had satisfactorily recited all our petitions and asked how long we expected to remain in retreat. He also gave us the names of some other people who were staying in the temple. When he had gone, the attendants brought us a brazier and some fruit. Our washing, water was poured into a bucket, and I noticed that we had been given a basin without handles. A priest called for our servants and explained where they would be lodged. Then, one at a time, the servants went off to their cells. Now the bell rang for the recitation of the sutras. It was very comforting to think that it rang for me. In the cell next to ours, a solitary gentleman was prostrating himself in prayer. At first I thought that he might be doing it because he knew we were listening, but soon I realized that he was absorbed in his devotions, which he continued hour after hour. I was greatly moved. When he rested from his prayers, he started reading the sutras in a voice that was no less impressive for being somewhat inaudible. I was wishing that he would read more loudly so that I might hear every word, but instead he stopped and blew his nose, not in a noisy, unpleasant way, but gently and discreetly. I wondered what he could be praying for so fervently, and hoped that his wish might be granted. Usually when we stayed in temples, the days passed rather quietly. The male attendants and boys who accompanied us would spend a good deal of time visiting the priests in their cells, and we were left with very little to do. Then the stillness of the day would be broken by the loud noise of the conch shell. Or a messenger would arrive with an elegantly folded letter and offerings to pay for a recitation of the sutras. Laying everything down, he would call for the acolytes in a voice so powerful that it echoed among the hills. Sometimes the booming of the temple bell became louder and louder until I was overcome with curiosity about who had asked for the readings. Then someone would mention the name of a great family, adding, "It is a service of instruction and guidance for her ladyship's safe delivery." An anxious period indeed, I thought, and would begin praying for the lady's well-being. All this happened at an ordinary time, when life in the temple was fairly peaceful. In the first month, things are in an uproar. People are constantly arriving with their requests, and as I watch them, I sometimes forget all about my own devotions. One day at sunset, a large party came to the temple, evidently intending to stay for a retreat. The acolytes bustled about efficiently, installing tall screens, which looked so heavy that I should not have thought they could possibly carry them, and flopping straw mats noisily on the floor. The visitors were taken directly to their quarters, and soon I heard a loud rustling sound as a blind was hung over the dog, barrier to separate their rooms from the sanctuary. All the arrangements were carried out in a most effortless fashion. The acolytes were used to their job. Presently I heard another rustling sound, this time of silk. It came from a large group of elderly ladies, discreet in manner and distinguished in appearance, who were apparently leaving their quarters and returning home. "Be careful about fire," I heard one of them say. "These rooms are very dangerous." Among their party was a boy of about 7 who called for the attendants and spoke to them in a proud, charming voice that I found very attractive. There was also an adorable child, about 2 years old, who was coughing drowsily. I wished that the mother or someone else would address its nurse by name, so that I might find out who these people were. The service continued all night, and it was so noisy that I could not get to sleep. After the matins, I finally dozed off, only to be woken by a reading of the sutra consecrated to the temple Buddha. The priests were reciting loudly and raucously, without making any effort to sound solemn. From their tone, I gathered that they were traveling monks, and as I listened to their voices, which had awakened me so abruptly, I found myself being strangely moved. I also remember a pleasant-looking young gentleman, evidently from a good family, who did not stay in his cell at night and performed all his devotions during the daytime. He was attractively dressed in wide, bluish-gray trousers and many layers of white robes. Several pages had accompanied him on his pilgrimage, and I enjoyed watching how respectfully they attended him. They had provided their master with a special screen, behind which he occasionally prostrated himself in prayer. When staying at temples, I enjoy wondering who the strangers are, and it is also pleasant to recognize people one knows. The young men who visited the temple were apt to wander near the women's quarters and spend more time looking in that direction than at the Buddha. Sometimes they would call for one of the sextons, and after a whispered consultation, set off for some other part of the temple. I saw nothing wrong in their behavior. At the end of the 2nd and beginning of the 3rd months, when the cherry blossoms were in bloom, I made another pleasant retreat to the temple. 2 or 3 good-looking gentlemen, apparently traveling incognito, arrived while I was there. They were elegantly dressed in cherry, blossom, and willow robes, and they looked very distinguished with the ends of their laced trousers neatly tucked up and fastened. They were accompanied by a very proper-looking attendant who held an attractively decorated bag of provisions. Their page boys, who carried flowering branches of cherry blossom, wore hunting costumes of plum red and bright green, with varicolored under robes and skirts printed with scattered patches of color. Also in their party was a slender retainer, who looked extremely attractive as he beat the gong at the entrance to the temple. I recognized one of the gentlemen. Of course, he had no way of knowing that I was at the temple, and he did not notice me as he passed near where I stood. Though I had no particular desire to meet him, this rather saddened me. If only I could let him know, I thought, and found my feelings somewhat strange. Whenever I go to stay in a temple, or indeed in any new place, it seems pointless to be accompanied only by servants. One needs a few companions of one's own class, with whom one can chat congenially. There may be some suitable women, even among one's maids. The trouble is that one knows all too well what they are going to say. Gentlemen appear to have the same idea, for I notice that whenever they go on a pilgrimage, they take along a few agreeable companions. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 78. The hunting costume of the head of a guard's escort. A patchwork surplice. The captain in attendance at the Imperial Games. An extremely fat person with a lot of hair. A zither bag. A holy teacher performing a rite of incantation at noon in the 6th or 7th month. Or at the same time of the year, a copper smith working in his foundry. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 79. A thief has crept into a house and is now hiding in some well-chosen nook where he can secretly observe what is going on. Someone else comes into the dark room and, taking an object that lies there, slips it into his sleeve. It must be amusing for the thief to see a person who shares his own nature. Priests on night duty are often confronted with shameful things, especially if they are light sleepers. For they are liable to overhear groups of young women joking about other people, abusing them, and venting their spite on them. All this is bound to arouse a sense of shame in the priest who lies next door, hearing everything they say. Some of the emperor's elderly ladies in waiting angrily tell the girls not to be so noisy. But they pay no attention and continue gossiping until finally they doze off without the slightest regard for decorum. Even after they are asleep, the priest still feels it is shameful. A man's heart is a shameful thing. When he is with a woman whom he finds tiresome and distasteful, he does not show that he dislikes her, but makes her believe she can count on him. Still worse, a man who has the reputation of being kind and loving treats a woman in such a way that she cannot imagine his feelings are anything but sincere. Yet he is untrue to her not only in his thoughts, but in his words. For he speaks badly about her to other women just as he speaks badly about those women to her. The woman, of course, has no idea that she is being maligned, and hearing his criticisms of the others, she fondly believes he loves her best. The man, for his part, is well aware that this is what she thinks. How shameful. When a woman runs into a lover with whom, alas, she has broken for good, there is no reason for her to be ashamed if he regards her as heartless. But if the lover shows that he has not been even slightly upset by their parting, which to her was so sad and painful and difficult, she is bound to be amazed by the man and to wonder what sort of a heart he can have. Oblivious of his own callous attitude, her abandoned lover carried on a glib conversation in which he criticizes the behavior of other men. How shameful when a man seduces some helpless court lady and, having made her pregnant, abandons her without caring in the slightest about her future. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 80. A large boat which is high and dry in a creek at ebb tide. A woman who has taken off her false locks to comb the short hair that remains. A large tree that has been blown down in a gale and lies on its side with its roots in the air. The retreating figure of a sumo wrestler who has been defeated in a match. A man of no importance reprimanding an attendant. An old man who removes his hat, uncovering his scanty top knot. A woman who is angry with her husband about some trifling matter, leaves home and goes somewhere to hide. She is certain that he will rush about looking for her, but he does nothing of the kind and shows the most infuriating indifference. Since she cannot stay away forever, she swallows her pride and returns. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 81. One has gone to a house and asked to see someone, but the wrong person appears, thinking that it is he who is wanted. This is especially awkward if one has brought a present. One has allowed oneself to speak badly about someone without really intending to do so. A young child who has overheard it all goes and repeats what one has said in front of the person in question. Someone sobs out a pathetic story. One is deeply moved, but it so happens that not a single tear comes to one's eyes, most awkward. Though one makes one's face look as if one is going to cry, it is no use. Not a single tear will come. Yet there are times when, having heard something happy, one feels the tears streaming out. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 82. When the emperor returned from his visit to Yawata, he halted his palanquin before reaching the Empress Dowager's gallery and sent a messenger to pay his respects. What could be more magnificent than to see so august a personage, as His Majesty seated there in all his glory, and honoring his mother in this way? At the sight, tears came to my eyes and streamed down my face, ruining my make-up. How ugly I must have looked. It was also very impressive to see the imperial advisor, Captain Tadanobu, who had been chosen as imperial messenger. He proceeded to the gallery on horseback, accompanied by 4 escorts on foot, all magnificently attired, and by some mounted escorts who were elegantly slender. Spurring his horse, he trotted along the wide, clear expanse of the Second Avenue. Then, dismounting at a short distance from the gallery, he waited by the bamboo blinds at the side, where the master of the Empress Dowager's household came for the message. Having received the reply, Tadanobu remounted and, once more spurring his horse, returned to the emperor. What a magnificent sight when he stood by the imperial palanquin making his report. I imagined the Empress Dowager's feelings as she watched her son, passing with his retinue. My heart leapt with joy, and tears came to my eyes, much to the amusement of the people who were watching me. Even common people are delighted if things go well for their children. When one imagines what the Empress Dowager must have felt, it is really awe-inspiring. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 83. One day we heard that His Excellency, the Chancellor, was going to appear at the Black Door, and we all gathered in the corridor to watch him. Presently he emerged, and making his way through our group, remarked, "Oh, what an impressive collection of ladies. It must make you laugh to see the foolish old man." The women next to the door raised the bamboo blinds, and one could see the varied colors of their many layered robes at the openings of their sleeves. Korchika, the provisional major counselor, helped his father on with his shoes. The major counselor was a handsome, impressive figure as he stood in the narrow corridor, beautifully dressed with his long train protruding from beneath his under-robe. Imagine having one's shoes picked up by a major counselor, I thought. The chancellor is indeed the grandest of them all. Seated in a row were Yamanoi, the major counselor, his younger brothers, and some other gentlemen. Their robes made a sea of black all the way from the wall of Fujitsubo Palace to the front of Toka Palace. The chancellor, looking extremely slender and elegant, stopped for a moment to adjust his sword. Meanwhile, His Excellency the senior steward, Fujiwara no Michinaga, was standing in front of Seiryo Palace. It occurred to me that he would probably not make obeisance to his own brother. But I was mistaken, for when the chancellor advanced a few steps, Michinaga knelt down in a most respectful attitude. It was a splendid moment, and I wondered what merit the Chancellor could have accumulated to deserve such glory in this life. Lady Shonagon, having announced that it was a day of abstinence, recited her prayers in an exemplary fashion. "Let us have your rosary for a moment," said one of the ladies, adding, "Do you suppose those prayers of yours are going to put you in the same class as His Excellency?" She and the others then gathered round Lady Shonagon, laughing loudly, but their jokes did nothing to detract from the Chancellor's splendor. When we mentioned this to the Empress, she smiled and said, "To become a Buddha is better still." Once again, I was overcome with admiration for my mistress. I frequently told Her Majesty about the way in which Michinaga had made obeisance. "So he's still your favorite," she said with a smile. If the Empress had lived to see how brilliantly Michinaga advanced in later years, she would have understood still better why I was so impressed by the scene. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 84. I remember a clear morning in the 9th month when it had been raining all night. Despite the bright sun, dew was still dripping from the chrysanthemums in the garden. On the bamboo fences and cross hedges, I saw tatters of spider webs, and where the threads were broken, the raindrops hung on them like strings of white pearls. I was greatly moved and delighted. As it became sunnier, the dew gradually vanished from the clover and the other plants where it had lain so heavily. The branches began to stir, then suddenly sprang up of their own accord. Later, I described to people how beautiful it all was. What most impressed me was that they were not at all impressed. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 85. On the 6th of the month, people come in throngs carrying young herbs for the festival on the following day. One year, when some children were spreading out the herbs, I asked them to tell me the name of a particular plant that I had never seen before. It took them a long time to answer. "Come on," I said. "What is it called?" The children looked at each other, and one of them replied, "It's called Mimenagusa, earless plant." "That stands to reason," I said with a laugh. "It certainly doesn't look as if it could hear anything." The children had also brought some pretty chrysanthemums, and the following poem occurred to me. "Pluck them or pinch them as you may, indifferent they remain, these earless plants who hear not what I say. Yet, since there are so many blossoms here, surely some chrysanthemums must hear." I should have liked to recite the lines to them, but being children, they would not have understood. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 86. One day, a man from the Office of Grounds brought me a packet wrapped in white paper and decorated with a magnificent branch of plum blossom. He said that it was from Yukinari, the controller first secretary. I eagerly examined the parcel. It looked as if it contained a painting, but instead I found a couple of the objects known as square cakes packed next to each other. I also found a twisted letter written in the style of a submission. A presentation. One packet of square cakes, the aforesaid packer being herewith respectfully presented in accordance with established precedent to Madame Shonagon. Below this came the date and the signature, Mamana no Nariyuki, and at the end, "Your humble servant would have liked to present this in person, but, fearing lest he be too ill-favored to show himself by daylight, he has forborne from coming." It was most elegantly written, and I showed it to Her Majesty. "What a beautiful hand," she said, taking the letter. "And what an amusing idea. But how shall I reply?" I asked. Should I reward the messenger? If only someone could tell me. "I hear Kornaka's voice," said Her Majesty. "Call him and ask what to do." I went out to the veranda and ordered a servant to tell the major controller of the left that I had something to say to him. Presently he appeared, having arranged his clothing very carefully. "I have not called you on behalf of Her Majesty," I said, "but for a personal matter." If a servant brings this sort of parcel to someone like Lady Ben or me, should he be given a reward? No, replied Cornaca. One should simply eat the cakes. But why do you ask, madam? Has some member of the Great Council sent you this? How could you suppose such a thing? I said. Then, by way of reply to Yukinari, I took a piece of thin, bright red paper and simply wrote, "The servant who would not present the cold cakes in person strikes me as being very cold himself." I attached my note to a magnificent branch of red plum blossom and dispatched it. Almost immediately, Yukinari arrived and sent in the message, "Your servant humbly presents himself." When I went out to meet him, he said, "I was sure that when you received my parcel you would send me a poem." What a splendid answer you produced instead. Women who are pleased with themselves never miss an opportunity to scatter their poems in all directions. I am delighted to be on friendly terms with someone who is different. I should get little pleasure from a woman who is always turning out poems. In fact, I should consider that she was being inconsiderate. Later, I heard that Yukinari had told the story to the Chancellor in the presence of a large group of courtiers. People like Norimitsu and Nariyasu are delighted with her note, Yukinari had said. Hearing this, the Chancellor had strongly commended my reply, but it is most unattractive to blow my own trumpet like this. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 87. One night the Empress's ladies, in waiting, were engaged in a heated discussion. "When they are making batons for the new chamberlains of the 6th rank," said one of them, "why do they use wood from the planks at the south-east corner of the Empress's office? Surely they could just as well take it from the east or west sides of the building. Or, for that matter, why not use wood from the southeast corner to make batons for chamberlains of the 5th rank? I see nothing very interesting in that," said another of the ladies. "It is the names given to different types of clothing that I find strange. They often seem to have been chosen at random. I can see why the name, thin and long, should have been given to long robes. But why sweat garment for women's loose coats? Surely they should be called long train, like the robes worn by boys. And why Chinese robe? The proper name would be short robe. I suppose they call it that because it's worn by the Chinese. Over robe, over trousers, and under robe all make sense. And so does big mouth, since the opening of the trousers is greater than the length. But the name hakama for trouser, skirt, is pointless. And why insertions for lace trousers? They should be known as leg clothes, leg bags, or something of the sort." Well, well, I said, "what a noise you're making. I myself have nothing to add on the subject, and I wish you'd all go to sleep." As if in reply to my words came the peevish voice of the priest on night duty. "That would be a great shame," he said, much to our surprise and amusement. "Do please continue talking all night." Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 88. On the 10th day of each month, the Empress ordered that dedications of sutras and of images be made on behalf of the late Chancellor. In the 9th month, the service was held in the Empress's office with many court nobles and senior courtiers in attendance. Heian was the preacher, and his sermon was so sad that everyone wept, including the young people, who, as a rule, are not very sensitive to the pathos of things. When it was finished, the gentleman drank wine and recited Chinese poems. Captain Tadanobu quoted the lines, "Where is he now when moon and autumn have returned at the appointed time?" It was splendid, and I wondered how he could have thought of such an appropriate passage. I made my way through the crowd of ladies to where the Empress was standing, and found that she was on the point of leaving. "Wasn't he magnificent?" she said. "Those lines were just right for the occasion." "Yes, Your Majesty," I said, I wanted to tell you about it, so I had a quick glance at the ceremony and then came to look for you. The more I think about his quotation, the more impressed I am. Indeed, said Her Majesty, I can see why you would be more impressed than anyone. One day Tadanabu sent someone especially to ask for me, but I did not go. Later, when we met by accident, he said, "Why do you refuse to be on close terms with me?" It is very strange, for I know you do not dislike me. Surely a friendship that has lasted all this time cannot end so coldly. At present, I can visit you here whenever I want, but the time may come when that will be impossible, and then what will there be to show for our relationship? Indeed, I replied, it would not be difficult for us to come together. But if we did, I could no longer go on praising you, and that would be a great shame. As things are, when I am in Her Majesty's presence with all the other ladies gathered about, I am forever singing your praises as though it were my function in life. But if we did as you want, how could that continue? Then it would go against my conscience to say anything nice about you. So please just think of me fondly and don't take things any further. How so? He said, laughing. There are many people on intimate terms who praise each other far more than mere acquaintances ever do. If I did not find that sort of thing so distasteful, I replied, I should certainly accept your proposal. But I can't stand men or women who praise their lovers and who get angry if someone says the slightest thing against them. That doesn't make you sound very dependable, said Tadanabu, which amused me greatly. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 89. One evening Yukinari, the controller first secretary, came to the Empress's office and stayed there talking until late at night. Tomorrow is a day of imperial abstinence, he said as he left, and I have to remain in the palace. I must certainly go home before the hour of the ox. On the following morning, a messenger brought me several sheets of koya paper of the type the chamberlains use in the emperor's private office. Today, I read, my heart is full of memories of our meeting. I had hoped that I might stay until the morning telling you of bygone tales, but the cock's crow forced me to take my leave. It was a long letter, very elegantly written, and contrived to give an impression that was quite contrary to the truth. I was much impressed and replied, "Can the cock's crow that we heard so late at night be that which saved the Lord of Meng, Chang?" Yukinari answered. It is said that the cock's crow opened the barrier of Han Ku and allowed the Lord of Meng, Chang, to escape in the nick of time with his 3,000 followers. But we are concerned with a far less distant barrier, the barrier of Osaka, slope of meetings. I then sent him this poem. There may be some who are deceived by the cock's crow that falsely breaks the stillness of the night. But such a fraud will not beguile the barrier of Osaka, where lovers have their trysts. And as a postscript, I am told that the gatekeeper is a very shrewd man. Yukinari promptly replied, I have heard it said that Osaka's barrier can be freely crossed. No need here for the cock to crow. This gate is ever opened wide and waits each wanderer who comes. Bishop Ruin was much impressed by this exchange. Bowing deeply, he took the first of the letters and brought it to the Empress. Later, he showed her all the others also. When I met Yukinari a little later, he laughed and said, I am sorry that my poem was too much for you, and that in the end you never answered. By the way, all the senior courtiers have seen your letters. Well then, I replied, you must have a very high opinion of me. If one has been impressed by a letter, one finds it a shame not to let other people see it. Since your letters, on the other hand, were rather poor, I hid them carefully and didn't let anyone get a glimpse. So our intentions were equally good. Yukinari laughed. You really have an unusual way of thinking things out before you speak, he said. Most women would have answered with something like, I did not like your letters. They are too shallow. Far from resenting that comment, I said, I am most grateful for it. Well, said Yukinari, it's a good thing you've hidden my letters. It would have been very sad and painful for me if you had shown them to anyone. Please go on hiding them in future. Not long afterwards, I met Captain Tsunafusa. Did you know that Yukinari has been singing your praises? He said. He told me about the conversation after your exchange of letters the other day. It is a great pleasure to hear people praising a woman one loves. I was delighted by his sincere manner and said, so now I have two things to make me happy. First, being praised by Yukinari, and secondly, being included among those you love. That's strange, Tsunafusa said. You speak as though it were something new. Sei Shōnagon, Makura no Soshi, The Pillow Book, Chapter 90. On a dark, moonless night in the 5th month, we heard several voices saying, "Are any of the ladies in waiting here?" What an odd way to speak, said the Empress. Go and see who it is. I went on to the veranda and asked, who is there with that loud, ringing voice? By way of reply, someone raised the blind and gently thrust in an object, which turned out to be a branch of narrow-leaved bamboo. Oh, I said, so it's this gentleman. Come, said one of the people who had brought the branch, let's go and report this to the palace. And off they went, the middle captain, the new middle captain, the 6th-rank chamberlain, and the others in the group. Yukinari, the controller first secretary, stayed behind. How oddly they behave, he said, looking at them as they left. We were picking bamboo branches in front of Serio Palace, and were intending to write a few poems when someone suggested that we might go to the Empress's office and invite the ladies in, waiting to join in. You didn't take long to show them you knew what they meant by the bamboo, and they left in a hurry. Most amusing. I wonder where you heard that story. It isn't something most people would recognize. I had no idea that gentleman was a name for bamboo, I said. I must have made rather a poor impression. To be sure, said Yukinari. It's not something one could be expected to know. While we were deep in our conversation, the men returned, reciting the verse. He called it This Gentleman. And what about the poems you intended to write? Yukinari asked the men. I find it very strange that you should come back without them. But how could we possibly find an adequate reply? It's better to make no answer at all than an unsatisfactory one. In any case, the story is already being noised about the palace. His Majesty has heard it, and he is delighted. They recited the passage over and over again, with Yukinari joining in. It was a delightful scene, and many of the ladies in waiting came out to have a look. After a few minutes of conversa, Tian, the gentleman, said they had to return to the palace. As they left, they continued reciting in chorus the line about the bamboo, and one could hear their voices until they reached the guard house of the left division. Very early on the following morning, Lady Shonagon no Mayabu arrived with a letter from the emperor, reporting the story to Her Majesty. The Empress sent for me in her room and asked if the report was correct. I do not know, I replied. I said it without thinking. Perhaps Lord Yukinari arranged it all to my advantage. Well, even if he did, said Her Majesty, smiling, you still came out of it pretty well. The Empress is always delighted when she hears that one of us has been praised by the courtiers, and she congratulates the fortunate woman in a most charming way.